Zane Thorne jolted awake as the shrill warning of a proximity alarm roused him. A long-range scout for the United Stellar Fleet, he and his vessel had been assigned to survey systems that were technically within the Vichakal border territories, but might serve as a weak point for a human counteroffensive. Currently, a tense Cold War was underway, as since the Third Battle of Coriana, the FCN lacked sufficient offensive strength to launch an attack. In fact, they were swapping transponders and repainting hulls at an impressive pace at the Saturn dockyards to create the illusion of greater numbers. Earth was a relatively new player in the cosmic arena, having only developed hyperdrives 80 years prior and settling a handful of worlds in the first wave. After some growing pains and upheaval, the allied worlds of Solara had formed a new space nation and declared an era of peace and prosperity, just in time to encounter the 8th Vichakal expansion fleet, which brought Mike to his current predicament. He was in a heavy reconnaissance scout, armored and swift, with a crew of 1 and a ship's AI. KMR 781 chimed in with sensor updates. Commander, scans indicate 4 enemy craft of 2 types. 3 appear to be Vichakal raiders and are currently firing on a ship of unknown type. Mike frowned as he examined the screens, increasing his stealth and altering his vectors. The Vichakal were pack hunters, predators from an arid world, and behaved somewhat like hyenas. A squadron of raiders had initiated this war when they tore apart a settler convoy bound for Neo-Ashton. They seldom engaged unless they had numerical superiority and would pursue their prey relentlessly unless deterred by force. And that was fine with Mike. Iris, his name for the ship's AI, had been designed to extract him from situations like this, and he wasn't about to let some poor alien merchant get taken like so many humans had been. Iris, charge the mag coils and chamber rounds in the following order. EM, armor, high X. Slave 2 cannons to each raider, but don't engage tracking lock until we close to 10,000 meters. Maintain vector and prepare for 90-degree intercept. He waited and observed the display as his ship stalked the would-be stalkers. The Vichakal were still surrounding the 4th ship and appeared to be toying with it. A few escape pods were jettisoning, but in small puffs of light and vaporized metal, they were being picked off by Vichakal lasers. Mike's blood boiled, witnessing that, and every fiber of his being raged at the cruelty, but he needed to remain calm. If he lit up thrusters and charged in guns blazing, the raiders could easily hold the ship before turning to engage him. But approaching from underneath at low power and charging them with a hail of cannon fire, he was hoping to catch all 3 at once and save the ship. Approaching inflection point in 20 seconds, Iris stated flatly. She wasn't programmed with much emotion, as Command had discovered that pairing a human with an emotive AI on extended missions led to complications. Mike grasped the controls and disengaged the autopilot. Iris, I need full perpendicular thrust. Divert all power from stealth systems and set screens to double front. Transfer. Ready. Let's go, assholes! Mike yanked back on the stick with all his might, and Iris shot upward as her inertial dampeners struggled against the engines. Mike began to see red creeping in at the edges of his vision, but maintained course. Ahead, he could see the raiders starting to alter their movements, adjusting to the unexpected assault. Too late, Mike grinned. Their hulls were exposed to him as he heard his targeting computer ping 3 locks, and he fired. Each ship experienced a sudden series of events almost faster than thought. 6 large bolts launched from Iris's forward cannons, each 1.5 meters of polished steel and tungsten. Those 6 bolts each carried a high-energy electromagnetic pulse generator with a fully charged capacitor capable of emitting an EMP equivalent to a 600 kiloton nuclear bomb. There went the Raiders' shields. As the shields flickered out, another 12 bolts shot forth, covering the 10 kilometers in less than a second. The first 6 were armor-piercing, breaching the underhulls and clearing the way for the high-explosive rounds that followed. In less than 5 seconds, it was all over, and Mike and Iris streaked upward past the alien freighter. Mike whooped in triumph and swung Iris around. All right, scan the 4th ship. Let's see if there are any survivors. He moved in closer and activated his scanning suite. The ship was eerie, an asymmetric, streamlined design that somehow evoked both water and stone simultaneously. The ship's power systems were down, that much was evident, but it appeared that at least one forward section maintained pressure and heat. Got an ID on this thing, Iris? Mike inquired casually as he searched for an airlock that seemed capable of forming a seal. Based on the transponder, this is a small courier ship belonging to the Virathi Conclave. Mike stood motionless for a full 5 seconds. The Virathi Conclave had been the dominant power in the Orion Arm for over 12 millennia, at least according to the data and intel Terra had managed to acquire. Extremely secretive and inward-looking, the Hravashi were the stuff of spacer myths. They theoretically claimed sovereignty over all space and believed in the right of all beings to live and explore. In reality, this left considerable room for interpretation and misconduct among the galaxy's species. The only thing that appeared to draw the Hrovashi's attention was attempts at genocide against another race or the subjugation of pre-hyperworlds. Navy Command had instructed its scouts about the Hravashi with one simple directive: don't. His instincts screamed at him to fire up his engines and flee, but he couldn't abandon the ship. It was humanity's first opportunity to examine the interior of a Hravashi vessel, after all, which could offer invaluable insights into their species. And he couldn't, Mike reasoned, allow this alien craft to fall into Vichkal hands. According to his scans, this freighter's main reactor was some kind of zero-point energy device and was emitting various forms of Hawking radiation. He wasn't entirely sure what that meant in terms of power output, but he knew that Hawking radiation was typically only produced by black holes. Just a quick docking to check for survivors and offer assistance, he muttered to himself as the ship attached to the hull. Please repeat your request, Commander. Iris spoke from the relay on his ear as he donned his spacesuit. Never mind, Mike checked the fasteners. Cycle the airlock and let's head in. Keep watch for any Vichkal and keep the engines primed. The airlock hissed open and Mike's flashlight swept across the alien ship. It was actually his first time aboard a vessel not constructed by humans, and the gravity difference caught him slightly off guard. The Hravashi must originate from a low-gravity world, as he was sliding across the floor. A thin layer of ice covered everything, which was probably significant, but Mike was too preoccupied taking it all in. Iris, where's that power reading coming from? He glanced at the display on his wrist. 12 meters ahead, then left. A central chamber has been sealed. Mike nodded and moved forward, carrying a med repair kit and hoping he was doing the right thing. I'm definitely going to get fired for this. He reached the corner and saw a sealed hatch with a blinking gold light above it. The size of the hatch struck Mike first, nearly 3 meters. If these guys don't eat me first. He approached the hatch and found a frost-covered panel. With a touch it activated, and something resembling a universal comm jack flickered to life. This made sense. As legend had it, the Hravashi had mandated that certain things like communications and airlocks be standardized across races to facilitate trade. In fact, in some languages, the term for galactic standard was Hravashi. Mike attempted to communicate through the wall. Hello? This is Commander Garner of the Terran Navy. I'm here to offer assistance. There was no response, and Mike figured there probably wasn't any reason to expect one. For all whoever was on the other side of the hatch knew, he could have been part of the attack. He tried the message twice more and was about to leave when his earpiece chimed. Commander, scans show alien drive signature in our vicinity. Crap, Vichkal? Negative. Ship of unknown type, but structural design indicates similar origin to the freighter we are currently docked with. Ship is approaching at high speed, mass exceeding 100 million tons. Matt, what? Mike's heart raced as he stood up abruptly. A Terran heavy dreadnought massed about 1/4 mil, and it was a 90-meter armored beast. Just then the door hissed and cracked open, releasing light and steam. Stepping over the threshold, Mike saw what appeared to be a medical bay. Unsure of what he was seeing, the bodies of several large-shelled beings, all claws and limbs, were sprawled in beds with flashing purple readouts. On one bed, far from the door, the displays were still golden, and the being was moving slightly. Mike sealed the door and checked his readouts. The room's atmosphere was actually about 30% oxygen, and he quickly realized it was very humid as his helmet fogged up completely. Not the damn time, Mike growled as he yanked off his helmet. The air reeked of a musty shore, and he set down his kit and fumbled for medical supplies. Iris, see if you can interface with this medbay and figure out something about this creature's biology. I'd rather not kill it. Mike began triage, though his brief course had barely prepared him for this. The being was enormous, perhaps 90 centimeters at the shoulder, with a wide chest, thorax. Mike corrected himself. He could see on one side there was some jagged metal protruding through the Hrovashi's shell, leaking lavender fluid. Do I pull this thing out, or leave it in? Working. Iris was quiet for another half-minute. Removing the object and applying medical adhesive 3 to the wound should stabilize the individual and prevent further deterioration. Are you certain? Mike glanced at the thing in the bed, which was looking up at him with its mouth mandibles trembling. The scene would have been nightmarish if not for the somehow hopeful look in the creature's eyes. 85% was the response. Be advised that the alien vessel has enveloped both our craft and the freighter, and my engines are being overridden. I am unable to operate. Well, at least they aren't making this simple. Mike grasped the piece and pulled as steadily as he could as the ship around him shuddered. The shrapnel came out with a slip sound, like chili coming out of a can. Blood, at least he assumed it was blood, started seeping out, but with a quick pass of the auto-sutures, the wound was sealed. He looked at the creature on the bed. Good luck, and turned to leave. Suddenly the door swung open and 3 large armored copies of the creature in the bed burst into the room. The lead Hrovashi looked at the shrapnel in Mike's hand and made a screeching sound grazing his ear. Shit! Mike dropped to his belly, wishing he hadn't left his sidearm on the table next to the bed, 4 feet above him. His right hand jostled something, and he saw his toolbox. He could hear the heavy footsteps as the creatures slowly approached him, burbling in their language. Mike grabbed a heavy wrench designed for turning valves and locks. He knew he was going to die. He saw the feet about to turn towards him and sprang up, brandishing the wrench. All right, let's do this! January 2297, San Francisco, Earth. A chilly breeze swept from the north, causing the throngs gathered in the Presidio to shiver around the designated landing area. Colony's director Evelyn Blackwood rubbed her hands for warmth, standing beside President Marcus Calum and the other assembled officials. She surveyed the crowd, reflecting on how much had changed in just 3 months. A mere 100 days ago, a Hrovashi world ship had emerged from Hyper less than 100 kilometers from the Centauri defense perimeter, signaling a request for talks. The Trizaki attaché had nearly lost it upon hearing this, being the overseeing agent for the poor, backwards humans' integration into the galactic community. 2 of his 3 hearts had gone into arrest when he learned the Hrovashi had declined his message, insisting on speaking only with the humans. The Hrovashi had returned Commander Garner and his ship unscathed, then requested a full copy of the human sociocultural database. They then retreated to their ship and remained for almost a week, while half of the colonial navy arrived to defend against the incursion. No one took any hostile action. It would have been pointless. The Hrovashi world ship was massive, resembling a cultivated piece of coral nearly 8 miles long, twisting and spiraling with lights and protrusions everywhere. No scanners could penetrate it, but its engines each seemed to have a power output of about 10% of a G-type star. It was highly unlikely that the human navy could have harmed the ship, even if it didn't retaliate. It was evident that it could, as a single derelict freighter had drifted too close and been promptly vaporized by an intense focused neutron beam. Afterward, a 1-kilometer exclusion zone was established. After the most unsettling week the governor of Centauri had ever experienced, the Hrovashi ship transmitted a message. It would be sending a delegation to Earth for some kind of diplomatic mission in 96 of their standard days, which were about 22 hours, and would be landing in San Francisco. The Hrovashi asked that the human leadership be present for a ceremony involving their religious leader and 6 dozen acolytes, though the translation wasn't exactly clear as to why. The Trizaki ambassador let out a sigh as he leaned towards the president. Have your experts figured out why the Hrovashi insisted on coming here? He was clad in a heavy cloak with a thermal suit underneath, as Trizaki hailed from a desert planet and struggled with temperatures below 10 Celsius. We have no clue, Ambassador. The president shrugged. All follow-up inquiries were disregarded, and they've simply been making their way through our space. They're adhering to our laws and regulations concerning traffic and shipping, but they won't respond to any of our questions. They're following your regulations? The ambassador raised an eyebrow and revealed his needle-like teeth, indicating amusement. The Hrovashi don't follow rules. They issue edicts. Their destruction of the Mahog proved that. Director Stewart joined the conversation. Commander Garner mentioned that the Hrovashi seem to have evolved from some kind of marine life. It's possible they'd feel more at ease on a rocky coast than anywhere else. A rumble began to grow in the air. There they are now. Initially a speck in the gray sky, but gradually expanding, the Hrovashi vessel drifted in the air on anti-grav. An impressive display in itself. Most species hadn't mastered anti-grav on a scale needed to lift orbital craft, but the rainbow shimmer around the ship was unmistakable. It is called Enigma, she said softly. What? The ambassador looked away from the ship hovering over the crowd. Not even the Trizaki, with their 1,000-year empire and mercantile power, had ever received a Hrovashi envoy. The ship, ambassador, the director pointed. Its designation is Enigma. A bit on the nose, wouldn't you say? President Durinian smirked. Indeed, the ambassador said as the ship settled gently like a bumblebee. The crowd, nearly 100,000 humans and aliens, was silent as the ship opened. A large ramp swung down, and a low pulsing music began to emanate from the vessel. A large group of Hrovashi marched out slowly, in step, wearing rust-brown robes. At the front of the procession was a single Hrovashi, larger than the others, and clearly the oldest. Hrovashi grew throughout their lives, it was said. Carried a large metal staff with a rusted metal claw on the end, as well as a silvered box which he cradled in his lower arms. Behind him, 6 more Hrovashi carried a stone cask on burnished copper poles, and then following were 8 rows of 8 Hrovashi, all carrying stylized claw-headed clubs that looked like ceremonial weapons. The procession marched from the ship through the crowd towards the assembled dignitaries. The low, pulsing music somehow resonated with Director Stewart to her core, evoking a sense of time and reverence. Looking out, she could see that the crowd was similarly affected, and the masses which had been cheering as the ship landed were now quiet. The Hrovashi halted at the foot of the dais, and the leader spoke. Surprisingly, the bubbling words that came out of his mouth were in accented English. I am Kelvaros, first speaker of remembrance. I bring the peace of the Hrovashi to Earth, home of peace. Director Stewart was taken aback. This entity was likely centuries old, yet it spoke in an almost reverent tone about Earth. I thank you, first speaker. I am Director Stewart of the Federated Colonies, and this is President Durinian of the United States. Of America, Kelvaros interjected, his head bobbing up and down. Yes, it is so. He carefully ascended the steps, his massive feet straining the metal of the stage and rounding the corners. He placed the silver box he carried on the podium and faced the president. We know, and so we come to pay homage to America and Earth. President Durinian opened his mouth to speak, but when he saw the box, he did a double take. Barely legible, etched into the metal surface, was an engraving. Auxiliary Data Drive. Made in Texas, United States of America. Sustor turned to the crowd and raised his staff. It is now time to share the tale of the progenitor, the first friend of the Hrovashi, the giver of freedom. The air above the data drive flickered, and a hologram projected into the air. A partially visible human face floated in the drizzle, a young black man with a mustache and gleaming teeth, his hair cropped short in a military cut. The recording buzzed with static and fragmentation before it began to play. Scouts log, day 5. I have passed the perimeter and I'm heading into deep space. I guess if I'm the only one awake on this ship, I can call myself Captain, right? So this is Captain Samuel Hawkins of the NASA interplanetary ship Horizon, confirming that all systems are operational. I'll be checking back in after 90 days of cryo, so take care. The image winked out, leaving static. In unison, the Hrovashi replied, Take care, Captain. The crowd erupted in confusion. People talked over one another, hurriedly checking their personal comm devices, searching for information about Samuel Hawkins and the Horizon. The Hrovashi remained motionless, their first speaker clearly waiting for the noise to subside. President Durinian's science advisor stepped up to whisper to him and Director Stewart. Sir, If that's from the horizon, it was a part of Project Roanoke. Roanoke? Like the lost colony? Stewart raised an eyebrow. Indeed, but in this instance deliberately lost. During the late 21st century, private spaceflight was becoming widespread, and there was public pressure to initiate deep space colonization, even with sublight vessels. Roanoke was conceived to send pioneer colonists to chosen target systems who would lay the groundwork for future settlement. The science advisor was reading from his wristcom a hastily compiled message from his own assistant. Why haven't I heard about this? Director Stewart frowned. The FCT should be tracking those ships down. I'm afraid they weren't a priority, Director. The ships were expected to take 50 years to reach their destination. A single operator who would emerge from cryostasis 5 days out of every 50 to maintain the ship, and a founding settlement of 24 men and women asleep throughout. Sadly, the blackpox pandemic of 21 and 15 hindered many programs, and it seems the project was abandoned. 2 ships, the Odyssey and the El Dorado, were actually discovered during the first wave. Both had experienced mechanical failures, and the crews had been lost. It was assumed that the other 5 ships weren't suited for the rigors of deep space, and they were declared lost. Well, it appears one has been found. The director turned to the ambassador. Are your people familiar with this story? It was perhaps the first time she had ever seen a Lubat at a loss for words. No. The Hrovashi aren't even really a race to us. They are a force of nature. If they had had interactions with Earth, everyone would have known about it. He shrugged, a completely human gesture. This is new information. Then let's learn some more. The president stepped up to the microphone. Ladies, gentlemen, citizens of the Federated Colonies, please keep things quiet. We are being graciously presented with what may be the greatest story in our history. The crowd quieted. Please respect the first speaker as he continues his story. Sustor gave an appreciative nod and adjusted a control on his staff. The recording resumed, showing Daniel's smiling face once more on the screen. Captain's log, day 56. First time out of cryo. Man, that initial piss felt great. Checked the systems and we're on course to... The recording skipped and Daniel's facial hair had grown considerably, indicating several weeks had passed. Sandwiches aren't too bad. At least the constant delta is giving me 0.1 G to cook with. Might try making some grits tonight. I don't have real butter, but I think Mom won't mind. After that, it's back to cryo for my 4th round. Take care. Take care, Captain. The Hrovashi intoned again. Hold on, so they somehow discovered his recording and decided to revere him? That's crazy. Director Stewart turned to the president's science advisor. It's like a cheesy sci-fi show, some Star Trek-esque nonsense. Before the man could answer, Sustor raised his staff. The anomaly brings him forth in fire and pain. His words echoed over the crowd, unclear if he was shouting or using a voice amplifier. The recording advanced once more. Daniel's expression was serious as he examined displays and operated the controls. The tagline indicated he was 238 days into his mission. Okay, so apparently there's a drawback to accelerating at 1/10 of a G for 8 months. I'm heading straight for some kind of large spatial anomaly, and there's no way I can alter course in time. He looked at the camera, resigned. This thing is emitting more radiation than Pyongyang on our day, but the cryo compartment is shielded enough that the crew should be safe. I'll have to break safety protocols and write it out in my suit. Someone needs to thread the needle if... Another glitch, and Daniel was in his spacesuit about to don his helmet. If someone finds this, I love you, Mom, Dad. I'm doing this to give life a chance to see the stars, and for people to visit other worlds. Take care, Captain. The crowd this time was silent, and many joined in the refrain with the Hrovashi. Some cried or reached for their loved ones. The display didn't shut off, but instead showed a blank holding image. The progenitor falls, his sacrifice to our need. Sustor again proclaimed to his people. In the beginning, he arrived to guide us on our path. Life is precious, the stars are for all. Sustor raised his staff. The captain watches over us. Then they remained silent for a full 3 minutes. The display suddenly flickered on, and the gathered crowd gasped. The scene had shifted, with the rear of the command room torn open and a reddish-orange sky glowing. A massive gas giant filled the sky, and the sound of crashing waves could be heard. Daniel's face came into view. He had been working under the workstation. His suit was torn and scorched, and a large scar ran along his hairline and across his left ear. Jagged scratches covered the left side of his face, where his helmet had caved in, and his skin was peeling as if sunburned. Captain's log day... Hell, I don't know. Day 1 without any workplace injuries? He chuckled somewhat frantically and took a deep breath. So that anomaly was some kind of wormhole, and the gravitational shear nearly tore the ship apart. Actually, it did. He glanced around. The entire cryopod is gone. The heavy equipment storage is gone. I've got the command module's emergency rations, and the main computer is fried. He lowered his head. It's like a bad movie. But I doubt any hot engineer with big cans is going to show up to help me repopulate wherever this is. He sighed and turned his head, cracking his neck. I'm on a habitable moon of some gas giant orbiting a red dwarf. It's not too bright, but between the planet and the star it's plenty warm here. And the tides get pretty high. I just hope I'm high enough, because I plan on sleeping here tonight. The display blinked and the scene had changed again. Daniel was standing in a cave looking down at the camera. All right, so this thing has its own power core. That should come in handy. The image shook as he picked up the camera. So during the night, water started coming into the ship. It's wedged on some rocks, so it won't get washed out to sea, but I had to relocate. He panned the camera to show the supplies he'd gathered. I've got 5 meters of solar panels, some cable, a toolbox, and this module. The food should be fine. It was in a secure locker. I'll go back when the tide goes down to get it, but in the meantime, he pulled out a small device and some headphones. It looks like the Space Explorers playlist Shelley made for me was almost wiped out in the crash, but I've got one song left. He put the headphones in and started bobbing his head. Could be worse. It kind of fits. Well, I've got to conserve power. Take care. Take care, Captain. Part 4. The crowd was now utterly silent between installments, observing with intense focus. A long-forgotten explorer from 2 centuries past had become the most searched and analyzed name on the Terran datanet. News outlets and data miners frantically searched through his history, attempting to uncover archival footage, images, even old social media posts. A dusty server was retrieved from Facebook's archive and reactivated just for the possibility of gaining some insight into this newfound hero. All right, so it's been 8 days, and I'm trying to record sparingly. Daniel spoke to the camera as if to a friend, likely doing so to ward off loneliness. His skin appeared healthier, and his scars had started to fade. I know that I might have enough power to keep going, but I definitely don't have unlimited data storage. He panned the camera around the cave, where he'd clearly been active. A bed of plant material covered with 2 blankets rested against one wall. Near the cave entrance was a workspace cleared for tools and metal pieces from the ship, connected to the solar panels. And beside a cook fire was a large stack of canned and packaged food. So I'm not sure what to call this place. I was going to name it after Avalon's Island from The Tempest. Daniel winced. But I can't remember what it's called. Sorry, Mr. Davis, I don't recall 11th grade English that well. He gazed at the purplish-orange sky. I guess I'll call it Avalon. Daniel glanced at the food. At least I've got plenty to eat. Between that and the water, which I tested, I should be able to survive here for about a year, which is good because these guys... He moved the camera down to show some shaggy dog-sized crustaceans huddled in the shade a few meters from the entrance. Are toxic. It's a pity, too. I was hoping to get a good boil on. They're somewhat skittish, but... Watch this. Daniel set down the camera and picked up a leafy branch. He dipped the end of it in a jar of peanut butter and held it out. Come on, little guy, here you go. One of the creatures inched slowly towards him, cautiously eyeing the food. This guy loves peanut butter. They all do. I woke up this morning and they were smashing the cans on rocks trying to open them. Come on. The creature, resembling a mix between a lobster and a yeti crab, swiftly extended a pincer to grab the branch. It immediately scurried back, savoring its prize and making a bubbling, chirping sound. Daniel chuckled. Ha! There, you see. I might have some companions on this journey after all. He grabbed the camera and began heading back inside. I think I'll name him Brutus, the horseshoe yeti. How's that sound, Brutus? He turned back to the cave entrance, but the creatures had vanished. Ah, well, he'll come around. Typical Horus. Anyway, I'm going to try to get my plasma cutter operational, because there's a locker on the ship I can't access without cutting through a bulkhead. Take care. Take care, Captain. Horseshoe Yeti? The director glanced at her associates. Horseshoe Yeti? President Durinian shook his head, wincing. No, it couldn't be. Hravashi, the ambassador stated flatly. In their tongue, it means friend of the people. Well, ain't that some shite? The president was interrupted by Daniel's next log entry, his hair and beard considerably longer now. He appeared tired and somewhat worn. He was adjusting the camera's apparatus, then set it down as the image cleared up. Well, damn, I guess it's day 109, and I just accidentally erased my last 4 entries. Suppose I should put in a call to tech support. He laughed and seemed to lose focus momentarily. He caught himself and took a deep breath. So let me recap and take you on a little tour. The camera lifted and he started walking down a cleared path towards the water. Daniel skillfully stepped over rocks and vegetation, his feet seeming to know the route very well. After I encountered Brutus and the gang, I decided to follow them home. I discovered a small colony of these guys. He rounded a rock wall and entered a medium-sized cove. There were dozens of the little crabs, scurrying about on piles of mud and rock, with plant material draped over it. They're amazing. It's like a termite mound meets an ant colony. They're always building. He panned the camera over several structures, and many of the crabs waved their limbs at him, crowding around his feet. Hey guys, no peanut butter today. Daniel turned the camera around to address it. Now, initially, I thought these creatures were just animals, but they're intelligent. Watch this. He focused on a crab attempting to pry open some kind of mollusk. They eat the sea snails, but they need to crack open the shell to do it. That's Horus, and I taught him a trick. As he watched, Horus put the snail down and scuttled over to a nearby rock. Flipping it over, he retrieved a small shiny object and returned to the mollusk. They've been taking bits of metal from the wreckage and using them. They reinforced one of their mounds with a system panel and Horus. He observed as the crab placed a metal shard on top of the mollusk and then grabbed a rock. Using the rock as a hammer, it cracked open the shell. Horus is using tools, but that's not the crazy part. He moved to show another crab doing the same thing. That's Finn. I never taught him how to do that. The camera swiveled back to Daniel's grinning face. Horus showed him. His eyes suddenly looked concerned. Oh no, I think the battery is... Be careful, Captain! The sole sound audible was the chilly wind coming from the sea and the pounding of waves blending with the soft, rhythmic music emanating from the data core. Everyone's gaze was fixed on the display floating above the throng. Sustor presided over his people. The progenitor instructs, the 2 tools of creation. Lever and plane, both from his hands. All except the 4 holding the silver casket raised their arms. A shadow is looming. The progenitor stands firm, Sustor called out to them. The destroyer approaches. Daniel brings hope. The ambassador shook his head in disbelief. A young human stranded far from home had taught some beings the basics of tool use, and they had deified him? This doesn't add up. The Hravashi aren't religious zealots. They established laws for peaceful conduct ages ago. They declared that all worlds should be freely visited and explored in friendship, and that harm to another sapient would be met with equal retribution. He glanced at the human dignitaries. Why venerate this Daniel Garner for a gift of knowledge? It's foolish. Director Stewart smiled. I don't believe the Hravashi are foolish. Quiet now, the president raised a hand. It seems there's more. I want to hear about this shadow. He gestured to the display, which had gone to static and then a picture. Daniel was there again, his hair having transformed into matted dreadlocks. He wore a vest made of upholstery fabric, salvaged from the ship no doubt, and around his neck a pair of headphones still hung, trailing to a worn player clipped to his shoulder. His familiar smile was still present, now weathered by the sun, and his left eye was cloudy white. It's been a while, mission log. How long, I'm not sure. I had a nasty fever from infection and lost a few weeks, But judging by this, he tugged on his hair. It's been over a year. Time is odd on a world that never darkens to begin with, but throw in some cheers and expelling my guts for a while and you just kind of go with it. He heard a sound and turned. That's Brutus and the group. They follow me around a lot. They actually seem to want me to go somewhere with them. Since the camera is functioning again, I thought I'd bring you along. The image wobbled as he picked it up. Static caused the audio to fade in and out as they continued their journey, offering glimpses of a primeval landscape. Ferns and fronds spiraled up from rocky earth, and large winged insects darted about. A few other crustaceans were visible, but mostly they kept their distance from Daniel and the crabs. He indicated some fruits and rock formations, as if narrating a nature documentary for a news channel. Suddenly he stopped and a low roar and crashing noises were heard. Daniel crouched down, the crabs chattering at him. "What's that, guys? Is it dangerous?" He looked into the camera. "Let's go investigate." He slowly crept forward, through the foliage and up to a ridgeline. He peered out and his jaw dropped. Looking at the camera, tears formed in his eyes, and then the scene was revealed. It was a crab colony, once similar to the one near his cave, but now a nightmare. Mounds were crushed and burrows excavated, and in the center, a large squid-like shelled creature, over 4 meters tall, fed on its prey. It bellowed and struck out, one of its pincered limbs seizing and cracking open a crab, then tossing it into its gaping maw. "Oh, shit!" The picture cut off. "The destroyer approaches," Sustor called. "Daniel stands against," was the response. "Okay, so that squid monster thing is bad news," Daniel said to the camera, now back in his cave. Behind him was a large assortment of metal and tools. "I did some reconnaissance, and it seems that creature is the apex predator around here. They move along the coast and decimate a colony every few months, leaving only the unhatched to emerge and continue. That's why Horace and the others don't stand a chance. They survive less than a decade before they're eaten." He turned away with a wet, hacking cough. "Damn, I was hoping it was just my eye, but I think the radiation from the anomaly is finally taking its toll." He held up his hand, stained red with blood. "I'm pretty sure there's cancer in my lungs, and my joints are aching too." He smirked at the camera. "It's a good thing I'm not a doctor, or I'd be concerned." He carried the camera to the pile of scrap, set it down, and began working. Horace and 2 other crabs were close by, sorting through metal bits in some manner. "So the squid has a shelled body, and from what I've found," he lifted a piece of shell the size of a dinner plate. "It's about 4 centimeters thick. I can't pierce that with my spear, but what can get through it is." Daniel held up a metal piece with a sketch on it. "A steam cannon. It'll be a metal tube with a weight and rod inside, and some fern material over the tube's mouth. I can construct a base to hold a fire, and there's water in the tube behind the weight. Heat and pressure build until it's strong enough to break through the material, and bam!" He clapped his hands. "The rod should pierce right through the shell." Daniel glanced at the crabs. "Are you guys listening?" The crabs chittered. "Good, because I'm not explaining this twice." He reached down and patted their heads above their mandibles. "You guys are the best friends a lost astronaut stranded in time and space could hope for." Daniel turned back to the camera, put his headphones in, and started nodding. "Still a good song. Okay, we've got work to do. I figure we have about a week before that squid's migration brings it here. Take care." "Take care, Captain." Now the crowd leaned closer, watching more intently than ever. Several children had covered their eyes when the monster destroyed that village. They didn't have to wait long. The display flickered on once more. Daniel leaned over the camera, now aimed at the cave's entrance. "Shit, shit, shit! It's early!" He grabbed a smoking branch and put it into a metal canister, attached to a large tube. "I misjudged. A squid is attacking the village right now. Horace and some of the guys have metal spears I made for them, but it won't be enough. Fuck!" He poured water into the cannon from an empty can and loaded a vicious-looking spar of reinforcing from the horizon. Daniel picked up his spear and stepped over the scattered tools. "I'm going to try to lure it this way, draw it to the cannon." And then he was gone. By pure chance, or perhaps a force of fate that decided his work should be preserved, the recording persisted. For 6 long minutes, the audience watched the screen and heard piercing shrieks from near the shore, and occasional muffled cries. The noise drew nearer and nearer, and Daniel could be heard in the audio. "Come on, you monster! Come get me! I bet I taste delicious, you Cthulhu-looking beast! Ark a shik S!" And a tremendous shriek echoed, the sound actually rattling some of the empty food cans. Daniel slid into frame again, his body scratched and bruised, with a flowing head wound dripping over his dead eye. "Yes," he panted. Carefully, cautiously, he adjusted the cannon slightly. Then he looked up. "No, where do you think you're going?" Gasping, he stood up. "That's right, big guy. Right here. No!" Daniel grabbed a heavy wrench and lifted it, grinning. One final time, he put in his headphones. "Yeah, here we go." He glanced at the cannon and held the wrench high. "All right, let's do this." And then the creature was upon him. Its bulk was too massive to be seen fully, but the audience could hear Daniel's wrench clashing against its shell and his wordless yells. Suddenly, the cannon in the cave's mouth jerked and flew backwards, knocking out the camera. The screen went dark. Sustor turned to the entire crowd. "The destroyer fell to the progenitor. Our friend made us free. We honor the progenitor and remember. Take care, Captain. Depth 0. Author, Captain Chewbacca. Part 6. The display shut off, and Sustor looked at the gathered crowd. Some of them stood open-mouthed, in shock. Others wiped tears away, and more than a few veterans nodded, respecting the sacrifice they had just witnessed. "Fuck yeah," the Undersecretary of Commerce muttered under his breath. The tall Hrovashi addressed the crowd. "The progenitor sacrificed himself for the people as a true and enduring friend. He fell that day, but we lived on. The weapon of the progenitor protected one village, then two. Then the 8 villages of Sukoth made the pact of building. We grew strong and safe and learned to defend ourselves against the wild. Our people thrived for many years, living by the example of the progenitor, defending others, inviting them to learn and to discover, and we honor him today." The 6 Hrovashi bearing the silver cask placed it down and moved aside. Sustor descended the stairs to the cask, waving his staff with purpose. "That staff," Director Stewart indicated, "it's not a claw." The light reflected off the dull metal, and indeed the age-worn metal wasn't a claw, but the wrench they had witnessed Daniel wielding in his final moments. All the Hrovashi carried similar implements, a ceremonial tool to honor the human who had perished defending them. Author's note, please open this link in a new tab in your browser, but continue reading. This story has a musical element. The music began to rise from the ship, and President Durinian turned his head slightly. The tempo was increasing and was beginning to sound familiar. "Hold on. How many acolytes did they bring?" 6 dozen. 72, sir." An aide reviewed the request. 72 companions. The word doesn't translate well, and their high priest. 73, then, the president inquired. "And they requested permission to fly and land the Enigma specifically in San Francisco, by name?" "Yes, sir. But what—" The aide was cut off by the assembled Hrovashi, starting to sing in unison. 73 men sailed up from the San Francisco Bay, rolled off of their ship, and here's what they had to say. "We're calling everyone to ride along to another shore. We can laugh our lives away and be free once more." But no one heard them calling, no one came at all, 'cause they were too busy watching those old raindrops fall. As a storm was blowing out on the peaceful sea, 73 men sailed off to history. "Ride, Captain, ride upon your mystery ship. Be amazed at the friends you have here on your trip. Ride, Captain, ride upon your mystery ship, on your way to a world that others might have missed." The Hrovashi continued to sing the chorus as the crowd joined in. Director Stewart shook her head. "Oh, gods, I can't even." But President Durinian smiled. As the melody washed over him, he marveled at the circumstance. That music from pre-colonial Earth had served as the foundational belief for an interstellar empire that had endured tens of thousands of years. A group of men had composed a song which had traveled further than any human experience had ever hoped to reach. He glanced at his aide's data link, which had parsed the lyrics, and queried the composer. Surprisingly, this had been their only hit. He wondered who still held the rights to the song. because they were about to become wealthy beyond imagination. And it was fitting, he supposed, that Daniel Garner had had that song. He was a friend to those who needed one and had invited them to explore and share with others. Farewell, Captain, he thought before joining in the singing. His journey of friendship across 22,000 years was complete, and the race that had called him friend was laying him to rest.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.